welcome to this deep dive.
Okay.
We're going deep into violence.
Right.
Using James Gilligan's book, Violence, Our Deadly Epidemic and Its Causes.
Right.
And, you know, we talk a lot about violence on this show.
Yeah.
But we're going to try to look at it a little differently this time.
Interesting.
So get ready for some unexpected connections because we'll be uncovering how seemingly small events can trigger really extreme violence.
Yeah.
And exploring the link between shame and violence and this idea that the most dangerous people might be those most afraid of appearing weak.
Yeah.
So
Gilligan's work is really compelling.
Yeah.
Because it challenges us to look beyond just kind of surface level stuff.
Yeah.
Instead of just simply labeling acts of violence as evil or seeing perpetrators as monsters, he encouraged us to ask, like, why? What leads someone to that point?
Yeah.
What's the underlying logic, even if it seems twisted to us?
It's kind of like trying to solve a mystery, right? We have to look for clues and try to understand the motives.
Totally.
And Gilligan actually argues that all violence, even the most seemingly senseless acts, represents an attempt to achieve justice.
Yeah.
At least as the perpetrator sees it.
Exactly. And one of the most powerful examples he uses to illustrate this is this story of an Irish rancher in the American West.
Oh, wow.
It's a tough story, but it highlights how cycles of violence and this perceived injustice can really escalate.
Okay.
And what's even more fascinating is that Gilligan actually has a personal connection.
Wait, what?
To this story.
Really?
Which adds another layer of complexity.
I mean, how personal?
He doesn't go into a ton of detail in the book, but he mentions that he actually knew the family involved.
Oh, wow.
And this personal connection, I think, informs his perspective and allows him to see the humanity in everyone involved, even the perpetrator.
So back to this idea of violence as a quest for justice.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that a little more?
Sure.
How does the rancher story fit into that?
So this rancher, he had escaped the Irish famine. And built a life for himself in a very harsh environment. You know, he likely felt like he was constantly fighting for survival, for his family's well-being. And violence, in his mind, was the only way to protect what he had and to right the wrongs that he perceived.
Yeah.
So even though his actions were brutal from his perspective, he was seeking a form of justice.
That's so interesting because it makes me think about how, you know, our own experiences in our cultural context really shape how we see justice.
Absolutely.
It's like what might seem just to one person could seem totally unfair to someone else.
Right, and Gilligan goes even deeper, arguing that shame, particularly in the absence of love or guilt, is a major driver of violence.
Interesting.
It's as if the person committing the violence is trying to obliterate their own feelings of shame, of worthlessness, through their actions.
So it's not just about external wrongs, it's internal too.
Yes.
But how does that actually play out?
So Gilligan spent years working with violent men in prison.
Yeah.
And he shares some pretty chilling case studies.
Okay.
He talks about these men being emotionally detached.
Almost
like the living dead.
Really? The living dead?
They often describe themselves as empty, numb, or even dead inside.
Wow.
It's as if they've shut down emotionally to cope with the intense shame and pain that they're carrying.
He actually calls them the living dead.
Yeah.
That sends chills down my spine.
Yeah.
Like they're physically alive, but emotionally, they're gone.
Right.
It's like, it's heavy.
And he has these quotes from inmates that really bring this to life.
Okay.
One inmate, Ralph W., said he wondered what it would be like to kill someone.
Wow.
Not out of anger or hatred, but just out of curiosity. To see if he could feel anything at all. And when he did kill someone, he said he felt nothing, just emptiness.
Wow. So is there a connection between this emotional detachment and the types of violence these men committed?
That's where it gets even more fascinating.
Okay.
Gilligan argues that the type of violence someone commits can be symbolic of their internal state, their motivations.
Okay.
For example, he talks about how attacks on the eyes and tongue are often related to shame and ridicule and this fear of exposure.
Why eyes and tongues specifically?
Well, think about it. Yeah. The eyes are how we see the world, how we perceive others' judgments. And the tongue is how we speak, how we express ourselves, how we reveal who we are.
So attacking those parts of the body is like trying to silence the judgment, the shame.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
He gives this example of an inmate named Ross L., who would specifically target his victim's eyes and tongue. And Gilligan connects this to Ross's extreme sensitivity to shame and ridicule. It's like he's trying to destroy the very things that allow others to see him, to judge him,
to shame him,
to make him feel ashamed.
That's a disturbing thought.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if that same logic plays out on a larger scale, too.
And Gilligan argues that it can.
Does he give an example?
He even uses the Nazi genocide of the Jews as a horrifying example.
How does genocide relate to shame?
Well, the Nazis, they viewed the Jews as a threat, a source of shame. Blaming them for their own social and economic anxieties. By attempting to eliminate the Jews, they were trying to eliminate the source of their shame, to purify themselves.
Wow.
Even if it meant committing unimaginable atrocities.
So we've gone from these individual acts of violence to this massive, horrific act of genocide. It's incredible how he connects all of this back to shame.
And this leads him to another really interesting point. The role of the prison system itself in all of this. He argues that prison can become a kind of twisted reflection of societal shame.
What do you mean by that?
So he describes the prison intake process as a degradation ceremony, a ritual designed to strip away a person's identity and dignity.
Really?
It's like a physical manifestation of the shame that society wants to inflict on those who have broken the rules.
It's almost like prison is a way of saying, you're not worthy of being part of our community. We're going to separate you, isolate you, and punish you.
Exactly. And he argues that this entire experience of prison, with its emphasis on control, power, and punishment, can actually reinforce the very shame that might have contributed to the violence in the first place.
So it's a vicious cycle.
It's a vicious cycle.
So we're really starting to see how shame, violence, and societal structures are all interconnected.
Yes.
And this brings us to another crucial element. The cultural construction of manhood.
Yes.
And how it relates to violence.
It's huge.
Gilligan actually argues that societal expectations of masculinity can actually encourage violence in men.
Absolutely.
You mean the whole boys don't cry thing?
Exactly. There's this pressure on men to be tough, aggressive, to never show weakness or vulnerability. And any deviation from that can be seen as shameful, as a failure to live up to those expectations.
So how does that translate into violence?
Well, think about the messages that boys often receive growing up. You know, they're told to be strong, to fight back, to never back down from a challenge. They're often rewarded for aggression and punished for showing emotion.
So it's like we're teaching them that violence is the answer.
It creates a very narrow and often harmful definition of what it means to be a man.
And when those are the only options you're given, it's no wonder that some men turn to violence.
Exactly.
It's a way of expressing themselves.
Yes.
Of proving their worth.
Precisely. And Gilligan uses historical examples, like the culture of honor in the American South, to illustrate how these pressures can manifest in different cultures. In that context, men were expected to defend their reputations, often violently. Any perceived insult could be met with aggression. Even if it meant risking their own lives.
So it's not just individual psychology.
It's both.
It's these broader cultural norms that shape our behavior.
Absolutely.
And create the conditions for violence to flourish.
Exactly. And these norms are often so deeply ingrained that we don't even question them. We just accept them as part of the natural order of things. But Gilligan's work challenges us to look critically at those norms and to consider how they might be contributing to the problem of violence.
This is all so much to take in.
It is heavy stuff for sure.
We've covered a lot of ground here. Violence as a quest for justice, the role of shame, the influence of the prison system, these cultural expectations around manhood.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
But Gilligan doesn't leave us without hope.
Okay, good.
He believes that we can change these patterns, both individually and collectively. And that starts with understanding the root causes of violence and challenging the systems and beliefs that perpetuate it.
That's a good place to pause for now.
Okay.
I think we've laid out some of the core concepts from Gilligan's book.
Yeah.
In the next part of this deep dive, we'll explore his solutions in more depth and discuss what we can do, both individually and as a society, to create a world where violence is no longer the answer.
Sounds good.
So we've established that violence is more complicated than just like bad people doing bad things.
Yeah.
It's really rooted in these psychological and societal forces. But now I'm curious about, like, what can we actually do about it?
Right.
Does Gilligan offer any solutions in the book?
He does.
Okay.
And it's important to remember that, like, he's not suggesting we just let violent people off the hook.
Right.
He's very clear that public safety is paramount. But he believes we need to go beyond punishment and actually address the root causes of violence.
That makes sense, but, like, where do we even begin?
Right.
It feels so overwhelming.
It is a huge issue, and it's complex.
Yeah.
But one of the things Gilligan really emphasizes is the power of seemingly insignificant incidents to trigger major acts of violence.
Oh, interesting.
It's like that saying, the straw that broke the camel's back.
Right.
You know, for someone carrying a heavy burden of shame and anger, a small event can be the spark that ignites the whole powder keg.
So you're saying it's not enough to just look at the immediate trigger.
Right.
You have to understand the context, the history, the buildup.
Yeah, you have to zoom out.
That led to that point.
And see the bigger picture.
Right.
Like, what are the individual's experiences?
Yeah.
What societal pressures are they facing?
Okay, so understanding that can help us prevent those final straws
exactly.
from being added.
It's about being proactive, not just reactive.
Right.
It's about addressing the root causes of violence, not just the symptoms.
Yeah.
And one of the most potent root causes, as we've been discussing, is shame.
Right, and this connects to another point Gilligan makes about how our current approach to punishment, especially in the prison system, might be backfiring.
It's fascinating.
When it comes to actually reducing violence.
He really pushes us to think about the purpose of punishment.
Okay.
Is it about retribution, about making the offender suffer?
Okay.
Or is it about rehabilitation?
Yeah.
About helping them change their behavior.
It feels like our current system leans heavily toward retribution.
It does, and Gilligan argues that this punitive approach can actually be counterproductive.
Really?
Harsh punishments like solitary confinement or physical abuse don't necessarily deter violence.
Okay.
In fact, they can create more resentment, anger, and a desire for revenge.
It's like that saying, hurt people, hope people. Yeah.
And he shares this really heartbreaking story about an inmate named Lloyd A., who endured horrific conditions in prison. Solitary confinement, denied basic necessities, even left to sleep in his own excrement.
Oh, my God.
It's a powerful example of how our system dehumanizes people.
Yeah.
And how that dehumanization can fuel the cycle of violence.
That's awful, but are there alternative approaches?
Yeah.
What does Gilligan suggest we do instead?
So he emphasizes that even people who have committed terrible crimes are still human beings, and sometimes treating them with respect and dignity can be more effective in reducing violence.
Interesting.
He even quotes some wiser, more experienced correction officers who understand this principle.
He quotes an officer who said something like, you can lock a dog in a closet for a month, but I don't want to be the one standing there when you let him out.
Exactly. It's a chilling reminder that even in a system designed for punishment, there's still a need for human connection and understanding.
Okay, so if we move away from this purely punitive approach, what are we moving toward? What does a more effective approach look like, according to Gilligan?
He's not offering easy answers, but he does point toward a way forward.
Okay.
He talks about the importance of cultivating love and connection.
Okay.
Both on an individual and societal level.
What's the connection?
It's about creating environments where people feel safe, supported, and valued.
That sounds nice, but how do we actually make that happen?
Right.
Especially in a world that feels so divided and distrustful.
Yeah, he suggests this multi-pronged approach that includes early childhood interventions, better mental health care, restorative justice programs, and challenging harmful gender norms.
So this isn't just about being nicer to people. It's about addressing these systemic issues.
It's about addressing the systems
that create conditions for violence.
It is, and it's a long-term project.
That's right. Yeah. No doubt about it.
Yeah.
But I think what Gilligan is really getting at is this idea that we need to change our entire cultural mindset.
Oh, wow.
It's about shifting our values and priorities.
Can you give me an example of what that might look like?
Sure. Think about how we raise boys.
Okay.
We often teach them that strength equals stoicism.
Right.
That showing vulnerability is weak.
Yeah.
But Gilligan argues that true strength comes from being able to acknowledge and express emotions, to ask for help when needed.
It's like we need to dismantle that whole boys don't cry mentality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We need to create spaces where men feel comfortable expressing their full range of emotions.
So it's not just about changing laws or policies.
It's much deeper than that.
It's about changing the stories we tell ourselves.
Yes.
About what it means to be human.
Exactly.
What it means to be a man.
You've got it.
Yeah.
And Gilligan believes that this is possible, and his work gives us a roadmap
for how we might get there.
We've covered a lot here.
Yeah.
It's hopeful to think about shifting those narratives, but I also feel overwhelmed by the scale of the problem.
It is a big problem.
Where do we go from here?
Right.
What can our listeners actually do?
Yeah, well, first, I think it's crucial to continue educating ourselves about the root causes of violence. Read Gilligan's book, explore other resources, and engage in conversations with people who have different perspectives. Expanding our understanding and challenging our own biases is key.
So it's not just about absorbing information.
No, it's about application.
It's about engaging with it and applying it to our own lives.
Exactly. And once we have a deeper understanding, we can start making changes in our own communities.
Like what?
Support organizations working to address violence. Volunteer your time. Advocate for policies that promote equality and opportunity. Every little bit helps.
I also remember Gilligan talking about challenging harmful gender norms.
Yes, it's so important.
What are some concrete ways that we can do that?
It starts with being mindful of the language we use and the messages we send to children. It's about questioning traditional definitions of masculinity and femininity and creating spaces for people to express themselves authentically without fear of judgment.
Right.
You know, think about the toys we give kids, the books we read to them, the conversations we have about emotions and relationships.
It all matters.
It all matters.
It's about creating a world where everyone feels seen and heard.
Yes.
And valued.
And valued for who they are, not for who society tells them they should be.
That's the key to preventing violence.
Yes.
Recognizing our shared humanity and creating a culture of respect.
I think that's it.
Okay, that was a lot to process.
It was a lot, yeah.
We went deep into Gilligan's analysis of violence.
We did.
Explored its psychological roots. And this complex interplay between individual behavior and societal forces.
It's all connected.
It's clear that this is a problem with no easy answers.
It's true.
But also that there are things we can do, big and small, to make a difference.
We could all do something.
Absolutely. And I think what's most important is that we keep talking about it.
Keep a conversation going.
Keep learning.
Yes.
And keep working toward a more peaceful and just world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
As we're talking about these potential solutions, something that really struck me from Gilligan's book was his point about how relative poverty can actually be more shame-inducing than absolute poverty.
That's a thought-provoking concept.
It is.
What do you make of it?
Well, it makes me think about how so much of our sense of self-worth is tied to how we compare ourselves to others. You know, if everyone around you is struggling, you might not feel as ashamed of your own circumstances. But when you see others who have so much more, it can trigger these feelings of inadequacy and resentment.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's not just about having enough to survive. It's about how you perceive your own status in relation to others. And when those others represent wealth and power, that feeling of being less than can be so potent.
So Gilligan is saying that this awareness of inequality, this comparison,
this constant comparison,
can actually contribute to violence.
It creates this like pressure cooker of shame and resentment that can lead to destructive behaviors.
It connects back to what we were talking about earlier.
Exactly.
Those final straws.
For someone already dealing with those feelings of inadequacy and powerlessness, even a small perceived slight can feel like this major threat to their sense of self-worth.
It's like that feeling of being looked down upon.
Yes.
Dismissed.
Yes.
Or not taken seriously.
Exactly. And in some cases, violence becomes a way of, like, reclaiming a sense of power, of demanding respect, even if it's through destructive means.
This makes me think about how we often talk about poverty as a risk factor for violence.
Right.
But Gilligan's adding another layer to that, saying it's not just about material deprivation.
It's about the psychological impact of inequality.
It is.
And he argues that if we want to truly address violence, we have to address those systemic issues that create and perpetuate inequality.
Right.
It's not enough to just focus on individual behavior.
Right.
We have to look at the bigger picture, the structures that create the conditions for violence to thrive.
This reminds me of another point he made about how even our desire for independence, our reluctance to rely on others, can be a form of shame.
That's so interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
I hadn't thought about it that way before.
Yeah, he uses the example of prison, which seems counterintuitive at first, right? He argues that for many men, it's only on prison, that they're actually guaranteed those basic necessities.
Right.
Like food and shelter and a sense of routine.
It's like a distorted version of security.
It is.
And care.
And he suggests that this highlights this paradox in our society where we shame people for needing help, for not being self-sufficient.
Right.
But that shame can lead them to make choices that ultimately land them in a system where they're completely dependent on the state.
It's tragic and ironic.
It is.
We stigmatize dependence, but then create systems that foster it.
So it's not just about changing individuals.
Right.
It's about changing how we think about interdependence.
Exactly.
About creating a society that supports people instead of shaming them for their needs.
It's a radical idea, but I think it's really at the heart of Gilligan's message. He's calling for a fundamental shift in our values, a move away from this hyper-individualistic mindset that often isolates and alienates people.
We've explored a lot of complex ideas today.
We have.
Shame, violence, prisons, societal structures.
It's a lot.
Poverty, independence.
It's all connected.
It feels like everything is interconnected.
It is.
What's the ultimate takeaway? What do we do with all this information?
Well, for me, it boils down to this. Violence is not inevitable. It's not just about bad people doing bad things. It's a complex problem with roots in our individual experiences, our cultural norms, and our societal systems. But the good news is those systems are created by humans, which means
we can change them.
We can change them.
There's hope.
There is.
We're not just doomed to repeat these patterns forever.
I don't believe so.
Gilligan's work is a call to action.
It is.
It's a challenge to examine our own beliefs and behaviors. And to work towards a more just and equitable and compassionate world.
It starts with understanding, with empathy, with a willingness to see the world through the eyes of others.
So what's one thing our listeners can take away and use in their lives?
Okay, so a powerful exercise would be to reflect on your own experiences with shame. And specifically, the fear of appearing weak or vulnerable. How might those feelings be shaping your interactions with others?
Oh, wow.
Particularly those who are different from you.
That is a thought-provoking question.
It's easy to see violence as something other people do. But we all have a role to play in either perpetuating or dismantling the systems that contribute to it.
So by becoming more aware of our own narratives around shame, strength, and vulnerability,
you can challenge those harmful norms that can lead to violence.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive.
It has been a pleasure.
Thank you for guiding us through Gilligan's work.
Oh, of course. It was my pleasure.
His work reminds us that understanding is the first step towards healing.
Absolutely.
And that even in the darkest corners of human experience, there's always hope for change.
I believe that.
We'll leave our listeners with one final thought from Gilligan himself. The most dangerous men on earth are those who are afraid that they are wimps.
Let that sink in.
Oh, wow.
It really challenges us to question those assumptions about strength and masculinity.
Okay.
And to consider how those assumptions might be contributing to the cycle of violence.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning.
Keep the conversation going.
And keep striving to make the world a better place.